Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 173. I hope you're doing well. I'm really starting to feel the end of year wind down now. Are you feeling that too? My garden has gone into summer mode, which is to say that there's not a lot growing now because it's too hot and too rainy for the annuals that I had growing. I've still got some lovely perennial spinach growing and my dahlias are flowering like crazy, which is a delight. And I've got some sunflowers and other things, but the vegetables are mostly gone. It's funny because in the Northern Hemisphere, gardeners take a break over winter while things are under snow or frost. And here in the subtropics, lots of gardeners also take a break over the summer, which is the same time, of course, as the northern winter. And we might grow a cover crop or just have a few bits growing. Actually, I've got some capsicum and eggplant growing that are doing well, but mostly the annuals are done because it's too hot. So we're actually gardening at the same time as folks in the Northern Hemisphere, even though we're in opposite seasons. So before we dive into today's interview, I want to welcome the people who have recently signed up to support the podcast on Patreon, and of course those who have been supporting the show for a while or from the very beginning. Your support means that this show can continue. Do you know that we're actually in our 4th year, coming up for our 5th year, which is amazing to me, and I'm so grateful to you. It is possible because of your support. So a huge thank you to those people and welcome to those folks who have just joined up. So today I'm talking with artist and watercolour educator Juliene Sinclair. Juliene is passionate about colour, and we're going to talk a lot about that in this interview, as well as her development as an artist, which is an amazing story, going from painting huge murals to living in a tiny space with her family and transforming into a watercolour painter and educator. I know you're going to love Juliene's energy and passion for creativity and colour. Let's listen. Juliene, thank you so much for being here. I found you online just a little while ago and I was drawn to the color and the joy and the excitement and the energy of your presence online. So it feels really good and exciting to be here with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Bethan. I'm so excited to be here. And from listening to your podcast, I'm pretty sure that you pronounce your name Bethan, right?
Yes, you got it right.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I have that right? Awesome. So that's a unique name to me. So I love unique names. And I'm so excited to be here. When you popped up, I started following you, and I love your big garden and how you incorporate, what you do with, the kids at your son's school, and it all really resonates with me. Very into it.
Amazing. Let's dive in. So I really want to talk about the origins of your connection with nature and your connection with creativity. I wonder if you can tell me something about your early nature experiences and your early experiences with your creative life.
Some of my earliest memories. So I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, very deserty, and I moved away when I was 7. So I don't have a lot of memories of really loving nature then, except on some of the weekends we would go to a cabin, and I have early memories of just exploring. When you're a kid, you're going exploring out in the woods. So I remember that, and then we moved to Missouri on a farm. We lived there for a few years too, and I have a lot of early memories just exploring, tromping through the woods. We had horses, and I spent a lot of time just doing that. It felt very much like an adventure when you're a kid, going out into nature, even though, when you're older and you look back, you're like, that was really small nature. But just being out there and exploring, I really loved that. So I kind of lost, I wouldn't say I was super into nature when I was young in terms of being really interested in it or really trying to understand it or foraging or collecting. I just have memories of being out in it,
Yeah.
collecting fireflies and being on my horse and that kind of stuff. So those are kind of my early memories. They're pretty subtle, but they were definitely a seed for something to come later.
And I think you've always been creative. Is that true?
I have always been creative. My mom, bless her heart, has spent a while ago, she spent a fair amount of money framing, like very nicely framing some of my childhood art. And I don't know, someday when I have a proper studio, I'm going to make sure I have the wall space to put them up. But I'm not sure what to do with them because there's a lot of them and some of them are really, really big.
Wow.
So yes, always creative, making whatever.
I love that she kept them. Looking back on those early creative efforts is such a joy. My dad actually kept this thing that I don't remember, but it was amazing to see. And it was a nature journal and it said Bethan's Flower Book. And just seeing that it actually started all that time ago was so gratifying, and it sort of ties your story together. And it sounds like your mum did that for you in keeping those treasures.
Yeah, she did. I feel really lucky to keep some of those treasures. They're so just weird and wacky, some of the stuff I made, and they don't make a lot of sense, and it just looks kind of weird, but it looks creative, it looks like I was excited by it and what I was creating. And so I love the lack of inhibitions we have when we're young. We just create because we're human and that's what we're supposed to be doing. And it's very apparent in those younger creations that I made.
Yes. Now, I want to hear the next step in your story. I know that you trained as an engineer and then you returned later to creativity. It was calling you back. So tell me the story of your career development and how you came to be now as a creative educator.
Yeah, so I actually applied. So when I was 14, we moved to Germany. And I had a art teacher that believed in me and pushed me, and I went to an international school. His name was Mr. Harford. I've been wanting to figure out a way to reconnect with him lately because he impacted me so much, but he really pushed me and I loved being in his class. I was actually in the lowest math class in high school. I didn't love the sciences. I didn't love history. I did okay in them, but I really loved my art class with Mr. Harford. And I applied to art school out of high school and I got rejected. I didn't know or have enough guidance to understand that I could have just gone to a regular school and majored in art. But I had applied to some specifically art schools and I got rejected. Looking back at what I submitted, I would have rejected me too. But so it was kind of one of those things that redirected me. I was like, oh, I got rejected from art school, so I have to go do something else. And I just kind of stopped creating for a long time. And I ended up moving so after a few years of kind of bopping around, I moved back to Southern California where my grandpa was towards the end of his life, and I had family down there. So I spent the last few months of his life with him, and I was going to a community college, and they had a college fair, and at one of the college fair tables, it was Humboldt State University, which if you're familiar with it, if you're not familiar with it, it's smushed between the coast of Northern California and the redwoods.
Okay.
And I saw a picture of the ocean, and I saw a picture of the redwoods, and I saw environmental engineering, but I didn't really see the engineering part. I saw the environmental part, and I was like, that's where I'm going, and that's what I'm doing. So that's what I did. I went up to Northern California, where I was deeply reconnected with nature. The redwood trees, I hope you get to them someday. Yes. They are a sacred experience. So I was in Northern California, and not surprisingly, engineering school wasn't. I loved hanging out with my friends. I loved Humboldt and Arcata, where the school is. I love the redwoods, love the place. But the coursework really didn't get me too excited. So I started picking up painting again. and I wanted to do a minor in painting. So I took some classes and started painting a lot more. And there also I had a teacher that really pushed me. Her name was Erin Whitmore. Don't remember that exactly, but she was amazing and she pushed me really hard. I was doing large scale acrylic portraits,
Wow.
actually. Super different from what I'm doing now, but she pushed me and my creativity just really blossomed under her guidance because I remember this one project we were supposed to do where I showed her 5 different photos of a friend I wanted to paint. And I was like, which one should I do? I was trying to talk to her about that. And she's like, put them all in there. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, paint them all in there. So I made this collage,
Wow.
crazy collage of portraits of my friend. And there I got back into painting. But then when I graduated, got my first job, started adulting. Adulting got me down.
Yeah.
I stopped creating again and got my first job as an engineer, which was started actually a really dark period of my life. Going into the real world, not having been directed into a subject that brought me a lot of joy. Everybody told me I would be employable, but nobody asked me if I would be happy. And it turned out that I was really, really unhappy. And I was not creating either. So after a couple years, to make a very long story of those dark years short, I ended up picking my paintbrush back up again. I just felt it deep in my soul. It's like, I need to be painting again. And so I started painting again. And at that point, I had moved to Montana. And so I switched eventually from portraiture to landscapes because the landscape around here is so inspiring. And we would be in it all the time, skiing on the weekend and hiking and all that kind of stuff. And so I was doing that. And then we were living in a small house. And so the acrylic paintings, large scale, just wasn't working for me anymore. I was making a mess, didn't have any space for it. Acrylic paint doesn't come off of stuff. It was a mess. So I picked up watercolor painting and I would keep it on a cookie sheet. I could just keep it on a cookie sheet tray, put it up on a shelf because that's how small it is.
What
I
an
could just,
amazing idea.
Pull it up, my paints, my brushes. Yeah, it's really small, very different from the acrylic large scale stuff I was doing. And I didn't love it at first. The watercolor, it felt very vanilla and just kind of like boring. I hate that word, but it kind of felt like that. I felt like with acrylic work, I was able to make more, I don't know, larger than life pictures. And when I started doing the landscape, it felt very landscape watercolor. It felt very ho-hum, for lack of a better term, just kind of ho-hum. But I kept going and I started trying to go down the route of just kind of the traditional artist route. I wanted to sell my artwork. I was trying to do that. And I was really struggling with that route because I was in this dark period of my life. My relationship that has since transformed was not doing great. I hated my job. I didn't really know who I was at that time. And so I ended up taking quite a bit of a break, circuitous route, but we had a kid. We ended up moving from town, selling our house to middle of nowhere. And I just kind of took a break from creating. I knew I needed to keep creating, but I wasn't sure what I was doing with myself. And I remember exactly where I was. I was driving into our valley. This was 2 years ago in November, driving into the valley. And I just had this download from the universe, this ping, whatever you want to call it, that it was loud as day, as if I was sitting next to me. That was like, I want to be a watercolor educator. And I ran with that. I was like, okay, sounds good. My grandpa was a teacher and my mom was a teacher too. So I felt like it was in alignment with my kind of my upbringing and the people in my life and my ancestors. And the traditional artist route wasn't working out for me. And I was kind of in a place where I was like, okay, I can try that out. And that's really when I started posting. If you go back to those original days, my posts are So cringe, but that's how you have
That's
to
how
start,
you
right? So
start.
I started posting. Yeah. I just started posting whatever kind of educational content about watercolor I could. And that's how it blossomed and just took a hold of me. And I started, on those earlier posts, it's like 20 likes. I'm on the right path. Yes. And I love looking back at that time because I'm just, when you get through a phase where the growth is small and it's kind of cringy and not as beautiful as it could be, it's just such a thing to be proud of, getting through that. So yeah, I just kept going. And that is the long story of how I'm a watercolor educator these days.
This is an amazing story. I love the, you know, our paths aren't linear, and you just told a story of a wave, the ebb and flow of connecting and reconnecting with creativity. But each time you disconnected and reconnected, it sounds like your creative drive and your connection with creativity is stronger than ever.
It is. One of the reasons I always was drawn back to creating, and also kind of always knowing that that's what I wanted to do and build, is because when you create something, you're creating something that has never been created before,
Yes.
will never be created again, and nobody else can create. And even if it's the littlest little line work, doodle, ugly watercolor painting that you're not super proud of, it's a unique item.
Yeah.
And that, I think there's just so much power in that. So that's actually what kept drawing me back, because all the other routes I thought of, building, creating in other forms is awesome. But for me personally, I loved the idea of creating something tangible, aesthetic, visible, that you can hold and look at. That's just a unique item. That's so powerful. Humans are creators. We're supposed to be creating. And I heard the other day, actually, listening to a podcast, that the opposite of creating isn't not, or the opposite of creativity isn't non-creativity. Maybe you've heard this, but the opposite of creativity is rage, which is maybe a very extreme word, but that it resonated with me because I had gone through quite a few years where I was suffering the way my life was going, and it was because I wasn't creating. And when you tap back into that, you're tapping back into source, your purpose, your uniqueness. And yeah, that just kept pulling me back in. So I'm very grateful to be just having creativity be a normal part of my life. Yes. Because I think it is really hard for people to slow down in this busy world. It feels fidgety and awkward and uncomfortable. But when you sink into it, there is so much magic in that. So yeah, I'm very grateful.
Oh, that's amazing. I would love to put a bit of context into this conversation, because I love to anchor in the landscape of where my guest is. And you said you started painting landscapes because your landscape was so beautiful. And I wonder if you can describe what you see when you access nature near you. What are you seeing? What's the trees like? What's the landscape like? Give me a description of your place.
Well, to tie it to somewhere that most people have heard of or have maybe some idea of what it looks like, I live very close to Yellowstone National Park.
Wow.
And so it is, Montana is sometimes called God's country. Maybe you've heard that, maybe you haven't. But when you come here, you feel that, because Montana has a unique landscape in that we have huge mountains, but we have huge valleys between the mountains. And so when you look out, the horizon is really far, and at the end of it are towering mountains, and the sky is huge. And where we live specifically, it's kind of arid. It's sagebrushy, but the mountains are big. We have our forest is mostly Doug fir, so lots of sagebrush. And in the springtime, so summer is very short and sweet in Montana. The winter is very long. But when spring comes, it blows up with flowers and wildflowers and the greenery and all that beauty that you missed all winter. And I think having a long winter makes you appreciate it more. So now it's the end of August and things are dry. So when I look outside right now, it's yellow grasses and that lovely light green silvery color of the sagebrush and a huge open blue sky and mountains in the distance. So that's what our landscape looks like where I am right now.
That's a beautiful description. And I would love to hear a bit more about your learning to love watercolor. You described that it wasn't your favorite thing in the beginning, that it wasn't punchy enough or powerful enough to portray what you wanted to portray, but you've obviously fallen in love with it. So it's your medium of choice now. How did you make that transition? How did you come to love watercolor and make it or harness it in a way that helped you express yourself in a satisfying way?
I think when I was painting large-scale acrylic portraits, I was going for impressing people or people being in front of it and just being like, wow, so big and colorful and crazy, or I'm not sure. And now I'm just so much more tapped into the process because now I create so much work that much of my work isn't actually that great, but that's not the point anymore. The point is to sit with the landscape. And there is so much beauty in that because when you're just hiking or walking through it, you're seeing it and you're enjoying it. But once you start actually allowing yourself to be still enough to see how the color on the clouds change as the sun goes down, and try to figure out how you can reflect the wind in the grasses, that is a whole different experience. And it was actually in that stillness, that allowing myself to sit in that stillness is what pulled me out of those dark years that I told you about. And discovering myself and being able to sit with myself, that's what watercolor landscape is to me now. Like, yes, it's being with the landscape and with myself. And that is not something I ever tried to seek in my acrylic portraiture. So yeah, that's really the difference now.
It's interesting because you did these large scale portraits, but you also did murals that were very public and very much like the end product is the goal and it's out there, it's for all to see, and it's the product in that case is the aim, whereas what you've described is that the process is all that's important. It's amazing to me that you went from producing a big, powerful, bold product that's in the public eye, and now it's all about the process. It's an internal thing. It's connecting with yourself, connecting with your world, connecting with this moment. It's amazing to me that you've pivoted from product output to process orientation.
Yeah, my story felt so long that I didn't even include the mural.
Do you want to say something about
the
that?
mural?
Yeah.
I was like, I feel like I've been telling this for a long time. The mural work is actually what got me creating a business around my art.
Talk about that a little bit.
And yeah, so there's this guy, this artist I follow. His name is Miles Toland. Are you familiar with his work?
No.
He does a lot of mural work, and his work is very spiritual. Like it's just so beautiful and so calming and so soothing. And I think he works with either acrylic or oil, so it's not watercolor, but he does a lot of mural work, and I love his work. So just so beautiful, and mostly people and portraits. So he doesn't do landscapes. And I reached out to him. I emailed him. He changed my life. I emailed him. I hadn't created anything, and I was like, I felt so pathetic writing my email. Hey, love your work. been following you for a while. How do you paint all these murals? You know, I kind of just asked him that, and he
Yeah.
responded and pretty thoroughly and told me something I needed to hear. I think a lot of artists need to hear. That is, you don't need to ask permission to create your work. You know, so obviously there are some walls, especially in America, like you do have to get permission, but a lot of the murals he did was in other countries, and so it's a little bit different there. But he's like, just go ask people. Like, you don't need to get paid for it if you just want to paint murals. Go and find some walls to paint. And I did. I still follow him to this day, and he definitely changed my life. But I started with my first free mural at the city. I got connected with the city, and I ended up painting a mural on one of their park walls that has since been totally tagged over and is dilapidated. But it was one of I lived in Bozeman, Montana, which there was just not much public art going on then in Bozeman. And so I had this one mural under my belt. And the city of Bozeman is super bougie, bless its soul, and it has what is it called? It's called a Bozeman Beautification Awards.
Okay.
So I had one of my best friends, Brianna Baker. I told her, I'm like, can you nominate me for that award? Yeah. And she did, and I won it. That's because amazing. There was no other murals. So, that was sweet. So with that award, I leveraged it to get my first paid mural, which is a huge mural on Main Street in Bozeman, which got me another award, but also way more experience and way more just, it's in a really public spot. So just lots of, publicity and just having a lot of eyes on it. So that really opened the doors to mural work for me. And I painted a fair amount of them. And I actually am designing one right now. I have another one I'm doing in a couple months. So I do that. Like if you look up Bozeman muralists, like I pop up. And so I still get some gigs for that. But because I don't live in Bozeman anymore, I don't really market myself for it or anything like that. But I love painting murals. I love the flow state of the physicality of it. I'm a very physical person. So the movement of it all. And this kind of ties into what I was saying about the wow factor of, the acrylic portraiture I did, that I think a wall should be beautiful.
Yes.
Instead of some, blank wall. So that's kind of the mural, the mural journey of mine. And it definitely led me into knowing that I can get paid for my work, knowing that I love creating the work, love it so much, and that I want to keep creating. So the mural work is definitely my origin story in terms of making quote unquote something out of my art.
Yeah, and I think that what you said is really powerful, that sometimes we just need someone to tell us a message at the right time. And your message was, you don't need to ask permission. Just go out, just make art and put it out there. And that was obviously your impetus to get the ball rolling with your creativity. And it's so beautiful that sometimes just the right person can tell us in our ear, just a gentle message, just the right thing at the right time.
Yeah. On that note, following Miles Tolan and some other people, in the beginning of my, when I really started creating and knowing that I wanted it to be my thing, I definitely went through a couple of years of struggling to find my style. And that included a lot of copying. I didn't sell any work that I had copied, but I definitely looked too much outside of myself to inform what I created. And I think it was an important part of the process. But it really, those things helped me evolve my own work. But that was kind of an interesting part when you're starting to create something and you're excited about it, but you also don't know who you are yet. It's kind of challenging. I think a lot of people give up in those, in that time. Be like, I don't know who I am. This work actually isn't my own. Or maybe they do go ahead with copying and like, that's what it is, which is not okay. But I do just want to tell, artists out there, it's like, just figure it out, keep going, keep creating. You're going to struggle with it. Maybe you have bright ideas right off the get-go. But if you don't know what to create, just create anything, whatever. If you need to copy a little bit, sure, but eventually you need to find your own voice and find out what you're about. And I just want to put that out there for anyone that's struggled with that.
Yeah, I mean, copying has a long history.
The highest form of compliment?
Yeah. Or like going to galleries and copying the masters in your sketchbook is a very, very traditional way of learning art, and completely fine as long as you're not, like you said, passing it off as your own. But that process of copying is really important for finding your own place in this whole mix.
Yeah. Definitely.
And you have this wonderful thing called the I Painted That challenge. And this is one way of getting people going, getting people started, getting people to know, because you might sit down in front of your sketchbook and just have no idea where to start. But with your challenge, you just get people's creativity moving. I'd love for you to talk about the I Painted That challenge.
I love this challenge. It is so much fun, and it's been such a great way for bringing the community together. So thanks for bringing that up. So it's called the hashtag I Painted That challenge. That's how, it's tagged on Instagram. So every Monday I post a reel of me painting, usually a crowdsourced picture from my audience. And by the next Sunday, everyone's painted it, everyone that wants to join in, of course. And they share it to me. So they share it to their own stories, or they post it to their own Instagram, tagging me and that hashtag. And then if it's a private account, they send it to me, or if it's public, I can find it. And then I share it to my stories. And it has been so awesome. I've gotten so much good feedback on it. And one of the most important things that I've heard in that feedback that I've gotten is that people get to see how everybody else paints the same picture. And that alone gives people inspiration and motivation that their art can be unique and none is better than the other.
Yes.
And oftentimes, most weeks, everybody, there's so many that are way better than mine, and I love it because it's not the point, that's not the point of creating. If you want to enter into some kind of competition or competition or something, maybe that is the point. But if you're just creating for the process, it's not. And so it gives people something to paint, which a lot of people struggle with, and it gives them community around it.
Yes.
And it's been so much fun. So if your listeners want to join in, then they can come over to my Instagram at Juliene.Sinclair and join in. We would love to see your art. I would love to share it. And you are more than welcome to paint with us.
Yeah, this is fantastic. And I think that when you're an artist, especially when you're an artist just starting out, it can feel kind of like untethered. But having a community around you, a community of people who are working on similar things, it can really boost your confidence and just give you a bit of structure. And I think creative community is really important.
It is more important than I really ever realized. And it's an interesting part of creating, because tying into what we were talking about earlier, when you create, it is a unique experience for you. And also that makes it feel lonely or less important, maybe. I'm not sure all the emotions that come around with that. Creating is like a solo process. But when you do it with other people that are feeling as excited about the process, it's joyful and fun. And when there's community around it, it makes a huge difference, mostly in encouraging you to paint and keep going. Everyone's going to be sharing it on Sunday, and I want to see everybody else's, and I want them to see mine too, because I'm proud of what I made. So it's been fun.
I love that you called it I Painted That, because it's like, yes, just even the name of the challenge itself embodies that joy and pride that you can feel when you've turned an idea into something solid on a paper that you can hold in your hands and share and show to other people. I Painted That is like, it embodies that pride. It's such a great title.
I'm so grateful that you mentioned that, actually, because it takes me back to when I created the challenge in the first
Yeah.
place. And when I started doing watercolor education, it was clear to me that it wasn't about me at all. It was about getting other people to paint, and also to hopefully help them help themselves as much as painting helped me.
Yeah.
Find myself, find the joy, be able to sink into my feelings, be at peace, be still. I really found that I really felt like, most people are struggling and in pain. And painting helped me overcome that. And so I kind of toyed with different names, like Juliene's Painting Challenge, whatever. But I decided on, I painted that challenge because it's definitely not about me. Like the painting is to get everybody else painting. And thanks. I feel grateful that you commented on that, because I forgot about that whole conversation I had with myself all those months ago.
That's beautiful. And it must feel wonderful for you to put out this challenge, put up the photo, put up your own example of this and say, hey, do you want to join me in this creative challenge? Here's some inspiration. Let's do this together. What does it feel like when you see all the paintings rolling in at the end of the week?
It feels so good because they're all so beautiful. I know that each painting that was done meant, it's not just the paintings and I painted that challenge. Any painting that is done means that somebody sat with themselves.
Yeah.
Which is something that doesn't happen a lot in today's world. So I love that each one of those represents somebody taking the time to dedicate some peace and quiet to themselves, to play with something that is challenging. Painting's not easy. Doing something challenging, doing something that they're proud of, and finishing it too. So it feels great. And the amount of comments I get, I'll get DMs from people commenting when I share in the stories, like, wow, this one's amazing, or this one's so beautiful. And so it really is a community effort to uplift everybody and to just sit with ourselves and make something beautiful.
Yeah, I love that so much. I want to go back to your passion for watercolor. I agree that it's such a wonderful medium. It's portable, it's quick, you can pick it up and put it down in a short space of time in a busy life. There's a quote from you, and it is that you say, you're not the boss of watercolor. You're co-creating with the medium. And I think this is such a wonderful way to describe what happens, because you're not always in control. You might try and then something happens and the watercolor takes over. Can you talk about this idea of co-creating with the medium of watercolor?
Yeah, so with other mediums like oil, gouache, acrylic, when you take a paint on a paintbrush and you put it on the canvas, that's where it is. That's where it stays. That's what it looks like. And so you are the boss of it. And if you don't know how to make it look beautiful, you're not a good boss. And with watercolor, it is just so not that. It is, you're co-creating with it, because, the paint doesn't stay where you put it. You have to know how to manipulate it and to make it look better than worse. And all of that takes time and learning and technique. But watercolor blends. It's very, there's a lot of movement involved, and that's one of the reasons people struggle with it too. It is a challenging medium because you're not the boss. And I think that in terms of, tying back to what I said about watercolor helping me out of some dark times in my life, that I think that there's something really spiritual in just giving up that ego in your art and being okay with it and learning from it. I didn't make this one perfect the way I wanted to, but I can do it again, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a co-creation process with watercolor, which is really hard for people. But when you embrace that, man, it's fun and healing. Fun and healing.
I love in your work that you, instead of aiming to make a perfect painting, you aim to make lots of paintings, and you say, okay, so I've learned a lesson from this one. It's maybe not exactly how I want, but I can identify what those points that I would change are, and now I'm going to call it good, and I'm going to move on to the next one. It's like this flow of work. Just, okay, great, I've learned my lesson. Now let's do another one. Can you talk about that idea of not striving for perfection, learning from your own art, and just calling it good and keep on moving?
Yeah, I think that something I strive to do with my audience and with my Instagram account and the art that I share is I think people need to see more imperfection in the painting process. And you don't see a lot of that. And so that was something I was really intentional about, is sharing my art that even looks like crap. Like I painted that challenge we did last week. It was lightning, and I had too big of a brush, and my lightning looked like cauliflower or something. I don't know, but it was really unimpressive. And I'm okay with that, because that's what people need to see to feel empowered to create themselves. And also, when I was doing acrylic, it took so freaking long to make anything. And if I wanted to be an artist and, sell my work, back when I was still trying to sell my work, I was like, how am I supposed to do this? I'm working a full-time job. I don't have enough time to, I'm going to make one painting every 2 months. And that, I had more creativity in me. So watercolor really helped me with that. It's an amazing tool. You can create something really beautiful in a way shorter amount of time. And so that, that tied with people needing to let go of the perfection is something that watercolor really lets you do. Also, on that note, is the space issue. I told you I was living in, after I had the ping to the download or the message, whatever you want to call it, to become a watercolor educator. I lived in a trailer for 2 years with my toddler and my husband and a cat. Like, I had no space, zero space. It was, and our first winter was historic. I was stuck. It was, again, dark years. I was coming out of the dark years, right? That was my rock bottom. That's a whole nother story we can talk about some other time. But watercolor helped me with the space issue and the creating fast. So I just got a watercolor journal. There's however many pages in that. Just fill that sucker up, like, pages don't need to be perfect. They don't need to be, they don't need to be finished sometimes. And that's a beautiful thing. That's part of the process. And I think more people need to be empowered just to create for creating's sake.
Yeah, I really like the way you phrased that. And I really like that idea that it's healing it's a healing act for you as an educator to say, hey, I made something imperfect, because there's so many perfect things on Instagram. There's so many perfect things out there on the web. And that is not the truth of a creative process. The truth is that all artists make a whole bunch of messy things, and to show the messy things and to say, hey, here's an imperfect thing I made, it's a loving act. I think it's a loving act to the people who are following you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, a loving act. I like how you put that. That's love. That's very loving. Lovely and loving.
You talked about living in a trailer while you're building your homes. I would love to hear, as a parent of a young dude, myself, I'd love to connect.
He's 4 years old right now.
I'd love to connect with you over that. You're living in the mountains with a family. You were building a home and you're building your business at the same time. I'd love to hear what it's like for you to juggle this creative process, transforming yourself into an online creative teacher, and juggling all the things of motherhood and creative business building, all that stuff. Tell me about a day in the life of Juliene, the artist and mum.
An engineer. I'm working almost full time now, so it's been a lot. I think that's one of the things that, well, two things. So watercolor helped me do that because one thing that I didn't mention earlier that I do want to mention is it's okay to paint small stuff. I really struggle with that with the acrylic work. I wanted to paint big and the murals, everything big. And so when I switched to watercolor landscapes and I mentioned it was kind of ho-hum, I had to get over that like smallness of it and feeling like I wasn't impacting anybody with that, like with that piece. It's like in my little journal, it's on my shelf, like no one sees it. And that's okay. It's the process. And so painting watercolor, which is a faster medium, painting small helped me create. So if you're struggling to create in your life, it's because you're doing something that's not fitting in your life. So you have to figure out how to get it to fit in your life. And I think that is really hard because of all these expectations we have of what we see, like you mentioned, like all the perfection out on Instagram and the world. But if that doesn't fit with your life, then it's not going to work, and you're not going to create, and you're not going to grow whatever it is. Like just you as a creative being, you need to be able to figure that out. So that is why I'm able to do what I do, considering everything else. So yeah, we live pretty far from town too. So when we first moved out here, we originally thought that I wasn't going to have to work and I was just going to be able to take care of our son. But then inflation happened, and pretty soon, like the cost of building our cabin went up, and pretty soon it was very clear that I was going to have to go back to work. So we actually commute him very far to school most days a week, 4 days. And I fit in my painting and my content creation and the rest of the parts of building a business, creating a digital course on color, my newsletter, the content, the painting. That's one of the funny things about growing a creative business like painting. You have to actually paint before you can share anything. And so it's a lot. Yes. And I just fit it into the cracks and crevices because I have learned very well by now that if I'm not creating, I'm not happy.
Yeah.
And so I just fit it in. And I work remotely too, so I'm a little bit more flexible like that. And I live in a absolutely stunning location, so that actually makes it easier for me to not worry about whether my backdrop is pretty or I'm not around a whole bunch of people out here, so I have the privacy to do whatever I need to do to make it work. So yeah, that doesn't quite answer your question. A day in my life isn't something I can answer because every day looks different.
Yeah. Well, I really love what you said about making it the right size chunk for you. So that might involve, like you said, you used to paint on a really large scale. Now you're making that into sketchbook size chunk. Also with that same idea, you might shrink down the time that you are dedicating to it. And that's not to say this isn't important and a priority in your day, because it is. And like you said, if you're not painting, you're not your healthiest self. And yet you can take that time as a creative meditation or a creative self-care thing in 10 or 15 minutes of the day. So if you need to shrink down the size of your creative practice physically and in terms of the time it takes, then if it fits in your day, you're going to do it. But if it's a big project or if it's a big amount of time, it'll end up being nothing because you can't squeeze it in.
Yes, that's where so many people get stuck, and I got stuck for a long time thinking you need to make a big project or you're just not going to get started, and it really just needs to fit into your life. It's hard to do, but it makes a big difference for sure. So and some days, well, one of the things about I painted that challenge is that it keeps me painting even though I'm teaching color, I'm teaching techniques, I have a son, I'm doing all the things. That challenge keeps me painting at least one landscape a week, right?
Yes.
I do in a lot of my other tutorials. It's not necessarily a full landscape. It's about color theory, or how to paint a tree or whatever. And so doing that, and like we talked about before we started recording, that it comes in ebbs and flows, your creativity. So sometimes when I have more time, I'll make 2 to 3 landscapes in a week, but at least I can do that. And even on the days that I don't make much, just dipping your paintbrush in paint and putting it on paper.
Yes.
Maybe that's all you'll do, but even that act alone might unlock another 45 minutes for you that you
Yes.
weren't planning on. So it's really just needs to scale down to whatever fits.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I share a passion, several passions, but the one that drew me to your content in the first place was your dedication and celebration of color. And you've mentioned it here, and I'd love to go into that with you because you're passionate about color. You identify as a color educator, which I think is amazing. So many people are confused about color and are trying to do it intuitively, but there's just a few little tricks and ideas and color theory behind what you're doing. And once you have your hands on those things, it unlocks a whole world of color mixing. And this is something you've dedicated your teaching to. Tell me about your passion for color.
Yeah, so even though I was a lifelong artist before I started teaching watercolor and still when I was doing acrylic, I had the techniques down. Like I could make something look pretty awesome, but gosh, my colors were off. And gosh, it was hard to how much paint I wasted and time I wasted trying to get the colors right. It's kind of crazy. I didn't even know. Nobody taught me, right? Even people who paint all the time, they're not taught color. And I picked up a book and I read it and it changed my life. I was like, oh, color theory. It's not that scary and it will make painting so much easier. And you understand the colors, you understand what they do, you understand how they mix. And I think people are overwhelmed because when you go to the paint store, for example, there's so many paint colors. You're like, oh, what am I supposed to do with all those? Which ones do I pick? How do you mix them together? And a lot of people go and buy pre-mixed tubes, but then they can't use those either because they don't know anything about it. And you have to mix it with other ones anyway. And so after I read that book, I don't remember the name of the author. It was a long time ago. That was probably like 5 years. I don't remember the name.
That's okay.
I don't remember the name of it. The book is called I Just Want to Paint.
Okay.
The name of the author I don't remember right now. But she broke it down and I did the techniques and all the stuff in the book and it totally changed my life. My next painting after I read the book was beautiful and it was easy. And I realized how much time I had wasted. When I talked about some paintings taking, am I going to take 2 months to make this painting? If you know how to use your colors, you can make that time go so much faster because you're not messing around with paint and making muddy colors. And so those were some of the first things I started teaching when I started teaching watercolor education. Some of those lessons that I had learned from that book and then just on my own time researching and studying and practicing. And one of the things I think people are confused about is that color theory is called a theory for a reason. So color is really fascinating because it's not something you can touch. It's an interaction between our eyes, the molecules in an object, and light. And so it can't actually be, and different people see colors differently because of how our eyes are. Different people have different cones and rods in their eyes, etc. So that, you got me talking about color, now I'm all excited and off track in color world.
Well, tell me about the color lab, because to distill all the things, your experience, your love and passion for color, you've transformed that into an amazing, really in-depth course, and I'd love for you to tell the listener about it.
Yeah, so the color lab is my signature course that I have right now that teaches people everything they need to know about color, breaks it down into a very simple step-by-step process to be able to mix any color you want, usually from the colors you already have. Most people think that they need to go and buy a whole bunch of pre-mixed tubes, or that they can't get the colors right from the colors they have, but it's because they don't understand the properties of the colors in the paints they have. And not all of the colors in the world have an infinite amount of properties you need to learn. You need to learn 2 to 3 properties that are the same for all colors. And so you need to understand which colors are cool and warm. You need to understand how to know which colors are cool and warm. And you need to understand how cool and warm colors mix together to create either dull or bright colors. And once you learn those, it is really simple to be able to take any paint, put a swatch out, know what it is, know whether it's cool or warm and some of the other properties about it, and then know how to mix it with another, know the properties of another paint and how to mix them together depending on what you want. A lot of people struggle with mixing muddy colors, or in the painting world, we just call it mud. And mud is a lot of, some people have mixed mud and it turns into like a baby poop color, which is really a mud. You're like, oh, that's ugly no matter what. But a lot of times mud is actually just unintended for your application. And so if you mix a dull color, it's actually a nice color. It's just not the one you wanted. So a lot of people struggle with purples and greens, for example. And that's because they're mixing colors that, 2 colors that lean away from each other on the color wheel and make a dull color, a dull purple, for example. And they're like, man, that isn't what I wanted. How do I do it? So then they keep using the same colors.
Yes.
And they just don't get to the right results. So that's what the color lab is. It is a step-by-step process to help you understand colors, and the colors you have. Usually everybody has, if you just have a basic color set, it usually has all the colors you need in it to make any color you want. Bright colors, dull colors, in-between colors for, the right application. And once you understand how to mix them together, you can paint way faster and way easier with way less headache, way less frustrating, way less confusing, and create the beautiful and impactful art that you're trying to create. So that's what the color lab is. It's been really fun to put it all out there into a structured format for people. So you guys can go to my website and use the code journal and get a discount on the color lab. If you struggle with color, the color lab will transform your relationship with color if you sat down in one day, it would take you a day. But there's 8 modules, so you can certainly do one per day for a week, and then maybe one day do 2. And in under 7 days, you will have transformed your understanding of color, and it will no longer be frustrating for you. Your paints will not be scary. You will be excited about it. So I wanted to offer that to your listeners.
That's very generous. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'll leave the link to the Color Lab where people can find out more about that in the show notes for the podcast. I'm wondering about color for you, because you've talked about a lot of the words that you're using. You've said joy, you've said feelings, you've said peace, you've said stillness. These are beautiful words that are about your internal experience of nature and creativity. And I'm wondering how color helps you connect with those beautiful feelings.
I think there's kind of 2 sides to it. So color is really frustrating if you don't know how to use it. And if you don't know how to mix it, and you don't know how to apply it, and you don't know why you're getting the ugly colors that you're getting. So those feelings of frustration and confusion really throw a wrench, a monkey wrench in your whole painting and creativity journey. So that's one side of it, and that keeps a lot of people from painting. Mm-hmm. And the other side is the pure experience of color. So if you're not trying to mix it, or you're not trying to create it, or you're not trying to apply it. Most people, that have full vision, maybe not, I don't have any experience personally with, color blindness or anything like that, so I can't speak for those people, but, with full sets of rods and cones, colors are so just magical. I think the scientific story of what they are, that it's not real, is just ties us into the awe and magic that is this beautiful world we live in, and the experience of being human. That we get to see color is just, it's insane. And I think that we've all experienced just color to just brings us joy. Rainbows, beautiful. I don't think you can look at a rainbow and not feel that sense of peace and awe of nature and the weather and the sky, and it just taps us into that. I think really innate sense of our humanity. Just being able to experience that is so beautiful.
Have you noticed that nature is so good at color coordination? When I see something out there, I'll think, oh, if you were an interior designer, you wouldn't need to invent any color combinations. You'd just go out and say, oh, that mauve is paired beautifully with that green. You just have to borrow from nature, and you'd always be creating something perfect.
It is truly amazing how the nature with capital N just creates these beautiful color palettes. I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to earth tones. It's because it's already done for you. It's like if you just put some earth tones together, it looks beautiful. I think humans try to complicate things quite a bit, but it is beautiful. It's often, I think where I live anyway, I've noticed that a lot of times the color, the amazingness of it comes from the pops of bold color and the rest of it being pretty subdued.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nature is, if you go to a forest, there's not a ton of color in there. But if you come across, a flower that's magenta, you're just like, wow, that's so intense. So I think that nature does a good job of kind of keeping it mostly subdued and then just providing those really amazing pops of color that just wow you.
One thing that I love about the things that you've said in our conversation is about being human. You've said we create because we're human. And I think that in what you've been talking about also speaks to we connect with nature because that is our nature. And that idea that these things are fundamental to us. Creativity is fundamental to us and has been since the beginning of human life, and our connection with nature is so innate, and we have oddly removed ourselves, but it's still in there. I just appreciate what you've been talking about the depth of our humanity that's all tied up with nature and creativity.
Yeah, have you read your brain on
Your
art?
Brain on Art? I'm reading it at the moment.
Oh my gosh, that book I just read it last winter. That book had a huge impact on me and confirming my belief that my already innate knowing that humans are creative. I'm not sure if you've gotten into the part of the book yet that talks about when humans started using fire to cook and to gather. So we would gather around the fire. We started cooking the meat, and so that started unlocking more nutrients that helped us grow our brains. And in that extra brain space and this connection where we were all gathering around the fire, our extra brain space started being used to create, to tell stories, to dance, to paint on the wall of a cave or whatever it is. And you see that, when you look back in history, it makes sense how we transition into that. And so just, based on that alone, we are supposed to be creating. And whether or not it's art, which I do think we're all supposed to be creating art, but problem solving is creativity.
Yes.
Humans started doing that, and that's just who we are. We're not supposed to not be creating our unique selves. Like each human is once in a lifetime experience. That's so crazy to me. Even the people that lived thousands of years ago, that one person was unique. So whatever you create is just wildly unique in this world we live in. I'm excited you're reading that book. It's amazing.
It's a good one. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. I love what you bring to the world, and I'm really happy to be connected with you now and have had this chance to chat. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Bethan, for having me. It has been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Juliene. I knew when I came across her online that she was someone I needed to chat to, about colour of course, but also about the whole creative journey. Now, Juliene has shared a link with me that's got a discount code already applied, and this link is in the show notes if you're interested in taking her course, The Colour Lab, and learning about how to confidently master colour theory and mix your colours easily with the colours that you already have in your own palette. Go to the show notes to find that link and get 5% off the normal price of her course. And also in the show notes, you'll find links to Juliene's website and social media. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.